I didn't pack in a hurry. That's the part nobody expects when I tell the story. They expect tears, slammed doors, maybe a shouting match in the kitchen. But I moved slowly, deliberately, folding each blouse the same way I've folded laundry for 40 years, placing each item into the suitcase with the kind of calm that only comes when a decision has already been made deep in your bones before your mind fully catches up. It was a Tuesday in March. The forsythia in the backyard had just started to come in, that early yellow that always made my late husband say spring was showing off. I noticed it through the bedroom window while I packed, and I thought, I will plant one of those at whatever place I end up next. That was the moment I knew I was really leaving. Let me start from the beginning because the beginning matters. My husband James passed away 3 years ago, 38 years of marriage, and then one afternoon in October he was gone. Cardiac arrest, no warning, no chance to say the things you always think you'll have time to say. For the first year I stayed in our house in Greensboro, North Carolina, the house where we raised our daughter Camille, the house with the creaky third step on the stairs and the kitchen window that sticks every August. I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning him, and because I genuinely did not know who I was in a house that didn't have his coffee cup on the counter every morning. Camille called every Sunday. She lived outside Charlotte with her husband, a man named Devon, and their 2 children, Owen, who was 9, and little Sophie, who had just turned 6. Camille worried about me being alone. She said it enough times and in enough different ways that eventually I started to hear it as something other than concern. I started to hear it as a plan. In the spring of my 2nd year without James, Camille suggested I sell the Greensboro house and move in with them. She said they had the space. She said the kids would love having me close. She said, and I remember this very clearly, "Mom, we want you there. We don't want you rattling around in that big house by yourself. I want you there." I held those words for weeks. I was 67 years old. I was healthy. I still drove, still gardened, still met my friend Paulette every Thursday at the diner on Elm, where we'd been meeting for 15 years. I was not rattling around. But loneliness after grief has a particular weight to it, and Camille's invitation felt like someone finally offering to help carry it, so I said yes. I sold the Greensboro house in July. 31 years of memories, sold in a seller's market for more than James and I had ever imagined it would be worth. After the sale, after paying off the remaining mortgage and settling some other accounts, I had a little over $2.3 million sitting in savings and investments. I didn't advertise this. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't something I discussed over dinner either. James had been methodical about money in the way that people who grew up without much tend to be, and I had learned from him. We had saved carefully, invested modestly, and lived within our means for decades. The number surprised even me when the estate attorney laid it all out. Camille knew I was comfortable. I don't think she knew the full picture. I moved into their house in August. The guest room was large, with its own bathroom and a window that overlooked the backyard. Devon had painted it a soft grey before I arrived, which I thought was a kind gesture. I brought some of my own furniture, my reading chair, my grandmother's writing desk, a few of James's books that I couldn't leave behind. The first weeks felt genuinely good. Owen and Sophie would knock on my door after school, and I'd sit with them at the kitchen table while they did homework, the same way I used to sit with Camille. It was Devon who changed first. Or maybe he was always that way and I just hadn't seen enough of him to know it. He wasn't cruel in any dramatic sense. It was subtler. He would walk into a room where Camille and I were talking and the conversation would shift. She'd become quieter, more careful. He had opinions about how the house was run, that he expressed not as preferences but as facts, and those facts seemed to multiply the longer I was there. The thermostat was to be set at 68 in the evenings. No exceptions, even in January. The children were not to eat in the living room, which I had not known when I let Sophie have crackers on the couch one afternoon, and which Devin mentioned to Camille rather than to me, so that she was the one who had to come tell me. Small things. But small things accumulate. By November I had started making myself less present. I ate dinner with them less often, made excuses about being tired, ordered things to the house, so I wouldn't have to ask Camille to pick them up. I told myself this was just adjustment, that all living arrangements took time. Then in January I fell on the back steps. It was an icy morning, the kind North Carolina gets sometimes. Not snow, just a thin glaze of frost that looks like nothing until you step on it. I went out to check the mail, and my left foot went out from under me. I didn't lose consciousness. I sat on the steps for a moment, took inventory. My hip ached, but not sharply. My wrist had caught some of the fall. Camille was at work. Owen and Sophie were at school. Devon was working from home. I came inside and told him what happened. I said I thought I might need to get my wrist looked at. He drove me to urgent care. They took x-rays. My wrist was sprained, not broken, and the hip was bruised but fine. The doctor said I should take it easy for a week or two. Devon drove me home and said very little. Thaddeus drove me home and said very little. That evening, after dinner, I heard them in the kitchen. I want to be honest about this. I was not eavesdropping. I was coming down the hall to get a glass of water, and their voices carried. I stopped because I heard my name. I know I should have kept walking. I know it, but something in the tone of Devon's voice made my feet stop before my mind had a chance to make a different choice. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he said. "She falls once and now we're going to be driving her to appointments every other week. Camille, I work from home. I cannot be her caretaker." Camille said something I couldn't fully hear. "I'm not being harsh," he said. "I'm being realistic. She's getting older. That's not going to change. And I did not sign up to run a care facility in my own house. This is not what our life is supposed to look like." Then Camille, my daughter, said, I know you're right. I don't know how to tell her." I stood in the hallway for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Sophie's drawings were taped to the wall beside me. Crayon suns and stick figure horses. I looked at them. Then I went back to my room, sat in my reading chair, and did not sleep for most of the night. I did not cry. I want to be specific about that. I wasn't numb and I wasn't in shock. I had actually heard something close to this coming for weeks, in the way you can sense a shift in weather before the clouds appear. What I felt, sitting in that chair at 2 in the morning, was something more like clarity. A door closing, and behind it, without any drama at all, a decision. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Franklin, and he has handled my family's legal matters for over 20 years. I told him I needed to update my will and establish a trust. I told him I also needed to know my options regarding a piece of property. Because here is the thing I had not told Camille, or Devin, or almost anyone. 4 months after James died, in a moment of both grief and pragmatism, that I'm still not entirely sure how to explain, I had bought a small house. It was in a neighborhood in Concord, about 20 minutes from where Camille and Devin lived. It was a modest house, 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, a backyard with a pecan tree. I paid $287,000 for it in cash. I told myself at the time that I was investing, that I might rent it out, that it was just a practical decision. But I think the truth is that some part of me knew even then that I might need a place that was only mine. Franklin helped me update everything over the following 3 weeks. I did it in increments, quietly, during mornings when Camille was at work and the children were in school. I revised my will to establish a direct trust for Owen and Sophie, their education, their futures, protected regardless of what happened between the adults. I restructured my other assets so that they passed through the trust rather than through any individual. I removed Devin's name from any document where it had appeared as a secondary contact. I did not tell Camille any of this. I know how that sounds. But I had spent a night in a chair understanding that my daughter had chosen to manage me rather than advocate for me, and I needed to act from a place of clarity rather than from a conversation that might get emotional before anything was settled. I gave myself until the end of February to be ready. During those weeks I behaved completely normally. I had dinner with them. I watched a movie with Owen on a Sunday afternoon. I helped Sophie practice her spelling words. Camille and I had a long phone call one evening. She was in the car on her way back from a work event, and she told me about a difficult colleague, and I listened and said the right things. I was present, I was kind, I was her mother. I was also paying to have the Concord house professionally cleaned, the plumbing inspected, and a new set of appliances installed in the kitchen. On the last Monday of February, I packed. Slowly, deliberately, the forsythia coming in outside. I did not sneak out. I waited until Camille came home from dropping the kids at school, and I asked her to sit at the kitchen table. I poured us both coffee. She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she gets when she's already preparing for something to be hard. I told her I was moving out. I told her I had a house in Concord and that I'd be settled there by the end of the week. I told her I was not angry, which was true, and that I loved her, which was also true. She said, "Mom, what? Where is this coming from?" I told her I had heard her conversation with Devin. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances. I just told her what I had heard, and that I understood she was in a difficult position, and that I was making the position less difficult by removing myself from it. She started to cry. She said that wasn't what she meant, that she was just venting, that she didn't actually want me to leave. I reached across the table and held her hand. "I believe you," I said, "but I also heard what I heard." I was in the car with my first load by 10:30. Franklin met me at the Concord house that afternoon to go over the trust documents one final time. I signed everything at his office the following Thursday. Devin called me twice in the first week. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were polite, which told me Camille had given him some version of events, and that he was being careful. I appreciated the politeness, but I wasn't ready to speak to him yet. Camille called every day. I answered most of those calls. We talked sometimes for a long time, and sometimes we talked in circles, her trying to explain, me listening, neither of us quite arriving at the same understanding of what had happened. I think she wanted me to say that it was fine, and I couldn't say that. I could say I wasn't leaving her life. I could say I loved my grandchildren and would be at every birthday and school play. I could say that I forgave her, which I did, but fine was a different word, and it didn't fit. I planted a forsythia along the east fence in March. The pecan tree was beginning to bud. I had a neighbor named Willa, a woman in her 70s, who brought me a plate of lemon cookies the first Saturday I was there, and who, it turned out, had lost her own husband 2 years ago and played bridge every other Wednesday at the community center 3 blocks away. She asked if I played. I told her I used to. She said it would come back. She was right about that. The Concord house surprised me. I had bought it without living in it, and sometimes a space you've only seen with practical eyes becomes something different when your daily life moves into it. The morning light in the kitchen was better than I'd expected. The covered porch faced west, which meant I could sit outside in the evenings with a book and catch the last hour of light. I hung James's landscape print in the hallway, and it looked as if it had always been there. I want to be honest about the loneliness too, because it's real, and I think it matters. Moving out was the right decision, and it was also hard. There were evenings in the first month when the quiet sat heavy, when I'd catch myself listening for the sound of children down the hall and hearing nothing. Grief and solitude are not the same thing, but they can look similar from the inside, especially at night. I let myself feel it. I didn't push it away or dress it up as something else. I called Paulette in Greensboro one of those evenings. She listened for a long time. Then she said, "You've been managing other people's comfort for 30 years, Vera. Maybe you get to stop now." I hadn't told her my name was part of any story. I just heard her say it, and something in my chest loosened. In April, I had a conversation with Franklin about one other matter I'd been considering. When I had moved into Camille's house, I had, at her request, contributed to several household expenses, groceries, the children's extracurricular fees, some repairs. It was not a formal arrangement. I had done it because I wanted to contribute and because it felt natural to help. Over the 8 months I had lived there, the total came to just over $34,000. I had not asked for any of it back when I left. Franklin asked me, gently, whether I wanted to. He said I had grounds to recover it, depending on how the conversation had been framed when I moved in. I thought about it for several days. I thought about Camille crying at the kitchen table. I thought about Owen and Sophie and their crayon drawings in the hall. I thought about what it would mean to put a dollar amount on the months I had lived in that house, and what it would mean not to. I decided not to pursue it. That was my choice to make, and I made it from a place of wholeness, rather than from bitterness or generosity performed for an audience. I didn't tell Camille I had considered it and chosen otherwise. I just moved forward. What I did do in June was invite Camille to come see the Concord house. She came on a Saturday without Devin and brought the kids. Owen ran straight to the backyard when he saw the pecan tree. Sophie found the lemon cookies Willa had left on the counter and ate 3 before Camille noticed. We sat on the covered porch that evening and watched the light change, and it was the most natural conversation we'd had in months. She said, near the end of the visit, that she was sorry. Not the sorry she'd said in the kitchen in February, which had been about the situation. This was smaller and more specific. She said she should have stood up for me. She said she'd been so focused on managing the peace in her household that she had forgotten she was also someone's daughter. I poured us both more sweet tea and didn't rush to fill the silence. I told her that I didn't need her to choose between her marriage and her mother. I told her that was never the point. The point was that I needed her to see me, not as a problem to be managed, not as a guest who had overstayed, but as a person who had buried her husband and rebuilt her life and was still, every morning, doing the work of being fully herself. I told her I needed her to say out loud, even just to me, "My mother matters." She cried again. This time I let her. Owen came running back from the yard with a pecan shell he wanted to show us. Sophie climbed into my lap even though she was almost too big for it. We stayed until the fireflies started coming out, which in North Carolina in early summer happens right at that blue hour, when the sky can't decide if it's still day. Things with Devin have been slower. He is not a man who apologizes naturally, and I have not asked him to perform something he doesn't feel. What I have asked through Camille is that when I am in his home visiting my grandchildren, I be treated with ordinary respect. Not warmth he doesn't feel, just respect. He has managed that. It is not a close relationship, and it may never be, but it is a functional one, and I have made my peace with what functional means at this stage. The trust I established for Owen and Sophie is intact. It will pay for their college and, if they choose, a start in whatever comes after. It is in their names and passes to them directly. I have also kept a separate account designated for causes James cared about, a literacy non-profit in Greensboro, a scholarship fund at the university where he taught for 12 years. Those gifts will be made in his name when the time comes. It felt important to make sure that he was still present in what I leave behind. Paulette came to stay with me for a week in July, and we played bridge with Willa's group on Wednesday evening. I was rusty. I overbid twice, and miscounted trump once, and Willa's partner, a very precise woman named Henrietta, gave me a look I recognized from 40 years of faculty meetings. But I wasn't embarrassed. I just laughed and dealt the next hand. There is a version of this story where I am the hero of a clean narrative. The wronged woman who saw clearly, acted decisively, and emerged triumphant. I don't think that's exactly right. I made choices along the way I would perhaps make differently, with more information or more time. I stayed longer than I should have. I didn't say what I needed loudly enough, early enough, to the people who needed to hear it. I mistook presence for protection and contribution for belonging. What I know now, sitting on this porch with the late summer going golden and the pecan tree giving more shade than I expected, is that dignity is not something other people grant you. It is something you establish for yourself, quietly or loudly, depending on what the moment asks, and then you hold it. Even when it's inconvenient, even when the people you love are watching you hold it and wishing you would just let it go. James would have liked this house. He would have stood at the kitchen window the first morning with his coffee, looking out at the yard, and said something short and true the way he always did. Something like, "This works." It does work. Not perfectly. Not without grief or complication, or the occasional evening when the quiet sits too heavy. But it works, and it is mine, and on the days when I'm not sure that's enough, I go outside and put my hands in the dirt around the forsythia, and I remember that things planted in hard seasons still bloom. The night I sat in that reading chair and didn't sleep, I kept coming back to one thought. I had given the people I loved every reason to treat me well, and it hadn't been enough. That used to feel like a failure. Now I think it was just information. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from advice anyone gave me, but from living through it, is that the way people treat you in your most vulnerable moments tells you exactly who they are, not who they mean to be, not who they are on holidays or in front of company, who they actually are when there is nothing to perform and the inconvenience of your need is sitting right in front of them. Devin showed me who he was the afternoon he drove me home from urgent care and said almost nothing. Camille showed me who she was that evening in the kitchen. I didn't enjoy what I saw, but I was grateful finally to see it clearly. I think about the $34,000 sometimes. The groceries, the fees, the repairs. I chose not to ask for it back, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't generosity. It was self-respect. I didn't want to spend the next chapter of my life tallying what I was owed. I had already spent too long in a house where I was being quietly measured, and I wasn't going to start measuring back. Walking away from what I was owed was the first real decision I made entirely for myself, and it felt different from every other decision I had made in that house. It felt clean. What carried me through those months, the packing, the signing, the long, quiet evenings in Concord when I wasn't sure I'd made the right choice, wasn't courage in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter. It was the understanding, earned slowly over 67 years, that I knew the difference between what was true and what was convenient, and that I had enough respect for myself to act on that difference, even when it was hard. James used to call it backbone. I think he meant something larger than stubbornness. He meant the willingness to see a situation honestly, and then do the harder right thing instead of the easier comfortable thing. That's not something you're born with. It's something you practice in small moments until it's available to you in the large ones. The forsythia is doing well. I checked on it this morning before I sat down to write any of this. What I want to say to anyone who hears this story and recognizes something in it, Not the details, but the shape of it, the particular exhaustion of being managed instead of loved. Is this clarity is not the same as hardness. You can see someone clearly and still love them. You can understand exactly what happened and still choose to stay in relationship with the people who hurt you. What you don't have to do is pretend. What you don't have to do is make yourself smaller so that someone else's life is more comfortable. Dignity doesn't require an audience or a confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a woman folding blouses slowly on a Tuesday morning, watching the forsythia come in and knowing exactly where she is going. Camille and I are okay. We are working at it the way that two people work at something real, imperfectly, with effort, not always arriving at the same place, but continuing to try. Owen and Sophie will have what they need. I made sure of that before I made any other move. That was the part that mattered most, and I did it quietly, the same way James taught me to do most things that mattered, without announcement, without applause, just done. The pecan tree gave more shade than I expected. Some things, it turns out, were already growing before I arrived.